for having us, and thank you, Aramis, for making this body of work.
Thanks for coming, and thanks everybody else for coming too.
Welcome.
Sorry, I've never used one of these before, so
I can't hear you.
hello.
Well, just to start off the conversation a little bit with Aramis's work, and I had the privilege of coming to visit your studio about 6 months ago and just poke through and look at these new pieces, because as you'll see, the works upstairs, they share a palette, they share an imagery. The works downstairs also sort of share lines of imagery, more portraits, figurative. These are empty studios, the ones upstairs. And so, just to get into, what these things are, when we did have that conversation way back then in your studio, we were talking a lot about the issue of performance and the ways in which actually the three pieces around you that you're seeing, these are actually, they're dance studios. And they're places where not only, they're places for more than performance, they're places for practice and rehearsal. So, but of course they're paintings. So I wonder if you could, we'll just start off by kind of explaining, kind of situating them and what they're kind of doing and the link between practice and rehearsal and performance with paintings.
When I was thinking about kind of picking dance as a subject matter to work through, I thought it was important to kind of maybe make a correlation between the practice of painting and the practice of dance. That it's very rehearsive, that it's very, it correlates to the body, the distal proximal movements. When I was setting up the paintings, I wanted them to, especially these three, I wanted them to have a very kind of a comfortable relationship to the body, so that they were inviting not only to look at, but to kind of like think through, to kind of, maybe see how I executed them, or if you were curious about that kind of thing.
Well, executing them, like in terms of actually, because these were painted rather quickly, and in the same way that, just to like dealing with this idea of practice and rehearsal, and applying that kind of similar logic to painting. These were actually, it's almost like you've painted 10 paintings to get to this painting, because the brushstrokes which you executed sort of in a performative way ended in the final works, which you could argue are the performance.
Absolutely. I didn't want to have any, I wanted you to see really the history of how I did it. I didn't want any kind of paint that really overlapped. I wanted you to be able to see my brushstrokes, see the drawing, see the kind of like form and gesture without, I guess, any kind of camouflaging by technique.
Mm-hmm.
So that it was just a very kind of real, raw performance.
Right, and especially with the ones downstairs, which are done in just...
Yeah, there's a lot of them are done in 2 or 3 hours, really.
Yeah, one sitting.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So last night we were talking about this, and we were talking a little bit about like when a dancer is dancing and they have gone through this rehearsal process, they almost commit the choreography to muscle memory. So this is actually, of course there's improvisation, but there's actually this sort of the hope is that things kind of take over and your body knows what to do. And this is sort of the same kind of way that we ride a bike.
Sure. The funny thing about a painting, especially when you're making kind of like a live painting, is that you're going to see when I'm doing something right, and you're going to see when I'm screwing up.
Yeah.
A lot of things that I guess a lot of painting that I like, you really see that the artist kind of thinking through the process, or you can kind of see them making decisions, firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Bryce Martin, but there's a lot of reworking in those.
Mm-hmm.
Or even sometimes in Schnabel, the way that he'll just like fling a painting, or fling a shirt at a painting.
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's interesting to kind of see somebody just on the spot make that kind of decision.
Because there's that room for improvisation.
Definitely.
And like signature style.
Definitely.
But again, you're having a sort of a antagonistic relationship to style.
Yes, yes. I don't know. I mean, I see a lot of art, and because of what I do, and I don't know. I guess I feel like a lot of contemporary painting kind of falls into this trap of creating style or generating style, generating commodity, which is kind of a dead end if you're a younger artist looking for ways in. And I always think back to kind of painters that I'm able to kind of access or just look at. I mean, if you think about somebody like, I guess easily, like Cézanne or Picasso, I mean, if they hadn't died, they could have just kept painting. You know, it really would have, I mean, it just would have kept going. It's never this like end, you know, maybe, and I guess you could see something like that happen with Rothko towards the end of his, I mean, right before he committed suicide, you know, he switched to doing these black and white paintings. I guess there was some kind of finality. He only could have made so many of those, and after your systems start making them for you, you know, what's the point?
Right, but it's not like, well, just to push back on these pieces, the kind of way that you sort of negotiated style in these works is to kind of resist making up your own compositions.
Sure.
And could you maybe speak to where the found imagery?
I guess as a defense mechanism against, I guess, over-styling or coming to that kind of stylistic finality, you know, I chose images that I didn't have complete authorship over. I mean, these are all from film stills, and they're kind of 3 times removed. A lot of the paintings you'll see that there's dancers, and that's one form of expression. The dancers are then filmed, and that's another form of expression. And then I'm painting a still of the dancer performing on film, and you lose so much fidelity through the process. And I think that that's really, maybe if you're appropriating, where interesting kind of avenues to enter the conversation, to insert your authority, to, you know, enter the conversation with the image occurs.
But your authority is being mitigated by the fact that you're at bay to the first of all, the grainy fidelity of a film still, and trying to replicate that, and then I guess in this process of copying.
Definitely, I guess I'm seeding a little bit of that, you know, for sure.
Which leads me to the Soviet Revolution. But wait, we won't get there yet. I kind of, right before we go there, I wanted to just tease out a little bit more about what we were talking about in terms of sort of the unconscious and the ways in which pulling from an unconscious and the idea of intention or intuition might play out in these pieces, which we chatted a little bit about last night.
Well, it's funny, when you enter the room, when you enter a room with art, I think painting's the first thing you see that you can easily reject. You say it sucks, or you can even tolerate it, or it might be interesting and you look at it again. But bad painting, there's really something about bad painting. I mean, it's like a real pleasure just to reject it.
Right. We sort of know. We sort of know what feels right.
Yeah, it's funny. It's so intuitive. I mean, if you can't suspend belief or trust the hand or trust that you know, initial glance, then, you know, the game is over. So with painting, in particular, kind of muscle memory and all that stuff, I'm more interested in the hand. I'm more interested in seeing, you know, and kind of maybe going for that trust, going for that initial moment. I mean, obviously there's some matter of technical proficiency in a lot of these paintings.
To create well, I mean, in your case, you kind of are creating a facsimile of this film still. So you're actually trying to get as close to this image.
I want to disarm the viewer, for sure. I want to, you know, have them at ease.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you're not interested in these, and that's fine, you know, you can at least look at them for more than a split second. So, I mean, I studied neuroscience when I was getting my master's degree, and I started learning a lot about the breakdown of the brain and how the brain likes to see things. in medicine, you learn about the brain through deficits. So, if somebody has an accident or they have a stroke or whatever, you're able to kind of figure out what part of the brain is affected by what they can and can't do anymore. And I started thinking backwards that way. Well, what does the brain like? What is interesting for the brain? Why is it interesting for the brain? Why do we like two-dimensional images? So I started thinking about painting is more of a matter of anatomy and less of a matter of technology or even a matter of style. I mean,
by anatomy, you're talking about physical anatomy of humans?
Yeah, we like to see two-dimensional images.
Yeah.
And I like that idea. I like the way the image is important to us, by some kind of innate, unconscious, challenge to how we like to see things.
Well, in these ones, you've denied us that experience.
A little bit.
Because there's nobody in.
I think, in particular, in these three, I was reacting to a piece by Natalie Gerberg called "I Found Myself Alone." And in the Natalie Gerberg piece, there's this ballerina that kind of enters a confection shop full of like goodies and cakes and ice cream and cupcakes, and she starts spinning and messing around with the confections to the point where everything falls over on her, and she's like succumbed by sweetness. And I see a lot of art like that these days. It has this kind of apocalyptic flair to it. And of course my work has some of that too. I don't think you could be making work right now and not have some of that
Have a little
fatalistic edge to you. But I wanted to kind of, I guess, present the possibility for there to be a paradigm shift. Maybe say something a little bit more optimistic. And in optimism, I think that you really have to relinquish a little bit of trust to the viewer. So in these paintings, I wanted them to be empty spaces. I wanted them to have the possibility for discussion of either something that just happened, something that has the potential to happen, or again, you can reject it too.
Right. It's kind of a latent space. It's a space of possibility.
Definitely. It's an open phrase.
An open phrase. And the palette's quite particular.
Yeah, in being open, I thought about gender in particular. I didn't want the paintings to be either too masculine or too feminine. In fact,
although all the paintings are indeed men.
In this show they are, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a few women.
Oh.
But I mean, just stylistically, the kind of painterly language I'm using. There's a type of harsh gesture, but it's also very atmospheric. Things can go from kind of heavy-handed to loose and ephemeral very easily, and the way I chose to kind of handle paint. Also, the color pink is kind of plays a prominent role in these pieces, and that it's in between red and white.
Right, which of course has significance in terms of...
It has political qualities to it and political associations. And also, pink is a very somatic color. They're very physical, body-like works. They refer to the body in a way, without being paintings of the body.
And if we could use the red and the white, so we're kind of talking about with these pieces, even though they're sort of resisting a narrative, some of the figures featured in the large painting downstairs, which is, in fact, it is called, or wait, no, these are the ones that are called Endgame Aesthetics. And sort of, why don't we unpack the title a little bit, and that will sort of lead us to the paintings downstairs.
Well, Endgame Aesthetics, I was thinking in terms of nuclear war deterrence policies. I guess in the 20th century, you were either of the communist persuasion or the capitalist persuasion. And the only other option was to kind of wipe the slate clean through a nuclear annihilation. It became a tabula rasa. You were either with us or you were with them, or if either side tried to cross the boundary, that's it. We're getting the nukes out.
Which actually, particularly links to the history of dance.
Yeah, definitely. I'll get to that in a second.
All right.
So, in saying that, I wanted to kind of present a tabula rasa, especially these works upstairs, and that, I guess by saying it's an endgame aesthetic, you open the door for something else. You open the door for, whatever you're bringing to the painting. It's an invitation, I guess. At least I meant it that way.
Because the assumption is that the end of the world has come and gone.
In a way, yeah. I think that a lot of the kind of irony we feel today exists because the world didn't end, actually. And we all kind of expected it to. But, you know, it's maybe like a hypothetical end. Like, pretend it ended, and now we can start over. Let's start the dialogue over.
Let's start again. Let's start with a clean slate. And something else that we were talking about, another phrase that we kept bringing up last night was my way or the highway.
Oh, yeah. Well, that goes back to the tabula rasa kind of situation.
Right, connects with that. But these are not saying that.
No.
But we were also, just to go back one step, we were talking about my way or the highway, kind of in terms of that
Artistic fascism.
That artistic fascism, which is about style.
I've noticed that a lot of artists, including myself, tend to filter through things that are important to their own work by rejection. You know, I know what I'm interested in because I rejected all of these things, you know, and I know I'm not interested in that. I tend to find that collectors and curators think the other way. You know, they accept everything, or they should accept everything. I don't know if they do, and filter through that way. But, you know, being an artist, you really are, you do have this like fascist kind of contradiction in practice because you're creating an aesthetic. You're enforcing that aesthetic, you're repeating that aesthetic, you're spreading that aesthetic, you're propagating that aesthetic.
Fascism, I mean, just the way we're using it, this is about a singular vision.
I know that if I'm, you know, if I'm an impressionist, that I'm rejecting the salon. You know, there is that moment where you're saying no to this and yes to that, and it's this, and I'm in the world propagating this, you know. Which is very similar to kind of how you would go about spreading a political doctrine. You know, this is what I'm about. This is who I am.
Right.
You know, I'm not about that.
Here's the imagery that goes with it. And
Exactly.
yeah. But why don't we go to, since we're inching to the large painting downstairs which features a dancer.
Yes.
And that's another film still.
Yes, that's from The Night Porter. The dancer's name is Amodio Amodi. It's the first painting I actually did out of all of these paintings. And I had a studio visit where somebody kind of challenged me to make a painting of the naked figure. They thought that was, you know, they kind of saw my painting language and they were like, wow, you know, you really should kind of look into maybe the figure. And that stuck with me for a while because I was like, God, how do you like contextualize the contemporary figure? Like, what is the contemporary figure? Where is the body right now? And I thought about it for a while, and you know, I had seen this image from this movie that I had been kind of wanting to work with, and a friend of mine just really pushed me and said, just make the painting and see what happens. So I made the painting, and it was about 6 months later until I made another dance painting, but it had just been like sitting in my studio like a specter. You know, like, oh, this is really kind of interesting, but you know, I have to work these other things out. And when I finally got back to it, I think that even though the other paintings in the show are very different thematically, but it really informed kind of what I was interested in, what I was looking for.
And how so?
Well, it has a kind of, it has an openness to it, even though there's a narrative to it. Or even though there's a narrative subjected to it by its source.
So we're saying even less like there's so much drama and narrative in that piece, but we actually don't quite know what it is. So we're feeling this palpable sense of something, but it's sort of cut off.
Anytime you freeze something that's not meant to be frozen, it becomes an abstraction. Cinema, music, even art. Like sometimes when you photograph art, it just looks so different than the actual, you know, the real deal. When I kind of was looking at that image and I froze it, the only kind of moment I found that wasn't blurry that I was interested in working with was like this like Christ-like composition. I was like, oh God, you know, I'm not going to go there. But I did anyway. And then, you know, I kind of had to work through painting the Nazi in the background, which was, you know, another moment like, oh God, you know.
kind of the clincher in that film is where this unless I'm getting it quite wrong, but there's a moment where one of the protagonists is forced to take a stance and choose between sort of capitalism and socialism. What was that?
In the movie, I guess the movie kind of deals more with Stockholm Syndrome.
Okay. So.
But I guess what you would look at in that movie is there's a moment where, I guess, expressive freedom and kind of political doctrine come into friction. Mm-hmm. The individual in the movie is actually a Nazi officer. Mm-hmm. The joke in the movie is that he's a ballet dancer. There was no Nazi ballet. But the director was commenting on the fact that the Nazis were so kind of anxious to kowtow to any classical form that they saw as true beauty, the Greco-Roman form, that they would tolerate a homosexual amongst their ranks just because he represented this classical form. And I think that deals with the Stockholm Syndrome too, because the actual person who is the Nazi officer, who is the dancer, has this duality with their identity. And the victim becomes the perpetrator in a way, and the perpetrator becomes the victim.
So it's in a way like very, would you say that's a sort of a humanistic way to deal with this history, and kind of using your definition of humanism?
At the time, that film was seen as exploitive. Some people thought that it was daring, and other people thought that it was very, a very cheap kind of a cheap shot at dealing with that subject matter. I was interested in it because I think it refers to the kind of gray area in art that I'm talking about, where the artist is a fascism. They're enforcing this aesthetic. They're rejecting it. And that's kind of the stepping stone, I think, that led me even to make these studio paintings.
How so?
Because I was thinking about that, if I'm aware of this and I want to kind of be progressive, is it responsible for me? Being aware of that, it kind of gives you a responsibility.
Well, because humanism, as we're kind of talking about it, is really about it's a progressive idea. It seeks to respect individuals' identity and their own interests, and it's an open place for discussion about whatever people want to do. So you don't have to subscribe to any program in particular.
Well, also, I think, humans are a big gray area. And, it speaks to the gray and not to the black and white. A lot of people like to think in terms of black and white. But I think that it's important, I guess, being an artist, to speak to the gray. And in this case, the pink is my gray.
In this case, the pink. It's a pink gray. So one of the other sort of historical moments that we're talking about is having to do with Baryshnikov.
Sure.
And maybe you could just kind of open that up a little bit and.
Well, as you're looking at dance, I guess, in the late 20th century, you're bound to bump into Nureyev and Baryshnikov. And they're particularly interesting because they defected from a Soviet system into an openly capitalist system. Nureyev, of course, came to the United States and got to kind of rejoice in being openly homosexual. And Baryshnikov came to the United States and made movies and just kind of, I guess, looking back, it looks like capitalist propaganda. He's portraying himself as an alpha male of the dance company, sleeping with all the ballet dancers, making lots of money, being a jerk, cheating on them. Really kind of saying that this is what freedom has afforded me. If you send that message back home, suddenly dancing for the Bolshoi, enforcing tradition.
And the Bolshoi, right, is this sort of seminal performance theater for traditional ballet.
Traditional dance. Yeah. There's even a scene in White Nights where he's having this discussion with Helen Mirren about how he got to dance to some famous Russian political songwriter. That he finally got to do it in front of an audience in New York. while he's at the Bolshoi, taunting Helen Mirren to kind of like join him.
And because a couple things are at stake there. There's sort of like individual freedom to do things that you want to do
Yes.
in a gray way. There's really, we're talking about just a historical moment in time
Yes.
and a cultural identity because,
But either kind of persuasion would appear reactionary depending on which side you're standing on. You know.
and you wanted to deal with this. You wanted to deal with
Of
these
course,
things.
because I think that that's a lot of what art's about.
Yeah.
You know, I was really interested because my wife's full Venezuelan, I'm half Venezuelan. But something really interesting happened there is a lot of artists, when the Chavista revolution came about, started making Chavista art, which I thought was just so weird.
Could you explain what that is?
Well, it's a Chavista revolution. It's a kind of a, I wouldn't really deem it a socialist revolution, but that's what they called it.
Hugo Chavez.
Yes, and his regime. So it was really kind of strange to see people suddenly catering to the political temperament and the political, environment that was going on around them and benefiting from that. I guess, in America that seems so passé, but it isn't. I mean, that happens all the time, doesn't it? I mean, people do make commodity. They do feed into our system. They do, play the game quite openly too.
Play the capitalist game.
Yeah.
And convert, in a sense.
Yes.
Convert.
People make product.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Through the years, I've one of the things that I've kind of tried to reject is serialism and the idea of making product through and stylized.
Specifically artwork. So.
Yeah, because painting in particular, it has this this specter over it.
Right. But this body of work is, as you're saying, it's the first time you've exhibited in a couple of years, and it was the first time you wanted to exhibit a body of work kind of in its entirety.
Yes.
Because you felt like you could stand behind it.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Because it was not serial. It was not product. It was.
I guess it's thematically similar, and I like that. I mean, it was a real challenge for me to sit down and spend 2 years making paintings about dance, because you're constantly having ideas about other things you could do, but you're saying, no, I'm interested in this right now.
Do you remember sort of the moments where you said, oh, dance is going to help me get there. Dance is going to help me access this set of ideas.
Yeah, it's a lot of things, but I remember one thing in particular. I really love this band called the Cocteau Twins,
Oh, yeah.
which is an 80s Scottish band, and I love the way they sound. They have this very kind of androgynous sound, and the rhythm is very masculine, very heavy-handed sometimes, kind of ugly at moments. Even the guitars can be that way. But on top of that, you have this very ethereal vocalist, which creates a kind of contradiction. It's beautiful and ugly at the same time.
Kind of like feeling hot and cold water at the same time.
Definitely, it's sweet and savory. So I thought about making pictures like that, and I thought about approaching, and we were talking about the body and the human form, approaching the human form that way. It didn't have to be literal, but I wanted this hard kind of raw edge that is atmospheric at the same time. It creates a kind of contradiction, in how they're made and how you see them, and the painting language.
And they create contradiction because why? Because we're not sure what we're looking at. Because in a sense, they're actually not straight paintings.
They're not straight paintings, and I don't think that gesture is really the best way to portray atmosphere. It's not the best way to portray, certain things. Gesturality really came about in the 20th century to kind of, it was around before that, but as pure gesture, it came around with the ABX movement, really.
A mark made.
Yeah, it became about the mark.
As a signature.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you're sort of hoping that your marks are secondary to the image, or
not secondary. Everything has to be as important as the next thing. That it's part of the same system. It's not all or nothing. It's you just accept it as is.
Let me talk about the sort of choice of the subjects downstairs.
Okay.
And sort of where they come from and why you're interested in them.
Well, my poor wife, she's here in the audience, and I love her dearly, but she had to put up with me watching a lot of dance movies this year. last year.
And also specifically for movies too.
Yeah, I'm a big cinemaphile. I love watching movies. I love that format. And I love that it's already kind of like a dying breed. I think the golden era has already come and gone, and that's so interesting to me. So when going through a movie, I think you're really looking for the type of image that has some kind of neutral ground to it.
Neutral ground.
But is also kind of amenable to painting. I mean, some images are fantastic, but I wouldn't attempt painting them. I tend to stray from straight lines and things that are too mechanical.
And just to be clear, actually all of the compositions in the show are from film stills.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things I add or take out. Actually, in the stills that these came from, there's figures in them. But at some kind of point, I just took one out and liked it better. And it's funny, like I had to call my friend to come over immediately to tell me if it was boring. Is this boring?
Well, that's what I wanted to ask, is because these characters, this is the sort of moment when you're going through the movie and you paused it and you said, okay, this is, were there important moments that you were interested in?
Not really. They're usually just like asinine shots and panning this or that.
They look the right way at this moment.
And I guess the painting downstairs that we were talking about with from the Night Porter is probably the only moment in any of the movies I found that was actually kind of a prominent moment. The rest, I was maybe just looking for things in the shadows, afterthoughts, things that fill in space to kind of suspend reality. There's a really interesting quote from I forget who it is, but somebody was talking about when they were making Star Wars that they made these incredible models and then they only showed them for a second. You see them out a window or you just see them in a passing shot. And it's much more interesting when you can't really comprehend what you just saw.
Well, it's kind of like this, that we're talking about a little bit, sort of the suspension of belief, and sort of going back to your interest in neuroscience, sort of filling in the gaps.
Yes, yeah. A lot of movies now, they just really focus on showing you all the tricks. CGI, here's the monster, like here's a nice shot of its face. Before it was just kind of like they filled things in clever ways. I guess that started with Orson Welles. When he was kind of really trying to work on props and how to aggrandize things just from like one shot or something like that. Well, probably before Orson Welles, but that was the first thing that came to my mind.
Sort of just your thoughts about painting today. Just lightly. We were talking a little bit about Luc Tuymans.
Sure.
And we were talking a little bit about Corot and
it's
John
funny.
Gwynne.
I think a lot of the best contemporary painters right now are women. And saying that, there's not a lot of contemporary painting either that I really like. There's so much revisionism right now.
Revisionism.
Yeah, revisiting the past. I think a lot of people are doing Warhol right now, or doing pop art, or I've done pop art. Or they're kind of looking backwards, and revisionism can be a really good thing.
Well, just to trouble you a little bit, I mean, that these are looking backwards.
Well, painting's always revisionist.
Sure, yeah.
But I guess it's a very specific type of movie. The distance between the past and the present keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter. There's a lot of, I guess, exploration of modernism right now.
And the weird thing about painting is that you are confined to what painting is, and there isn't this sort of opportunity to experiment with what a medium could be.
I'm okay with that, though.
Yeah.
That's actually really comforting in a way.
Yeah.
With painting, you always have to be ready to make a fool of yourself, and if you're going to show a painting, you better be really ready to just look stupid. And once you let go of that and you get used to that, that's maybe really when you can start enjoying things.
And look stupid because why?
Well, a lot of people see painting as a dated thing. It kind of enters and leaves the intellectual conversation at will, which is actually, I think, a good thing. And it is such a weird, hermetic language. I mean, fewer and fewer people can do it, and fewer people know how to read it.
Are you interested in skill?
Sometimes it's refreshing, sometimes it's not applicable. I think skill, like anything else, should be applied when it's needed.
I mean, these to argue, I mean, to go there, I mean, these are about the execution of sort of like a practice skill, in a sense. And that was a very deliberate choice on your part.
Because I was just talking about dance, I felt like skill had to come into play.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a level of skill in a lot of kind of traditional dance.
Yeah.
Even in dancing, you know somebody's dancing like a moron.
Right, and we were saying, it's about kind of embodying these steps that someone
Yes.
has laid out for you, that you are, the dancer is really supposed to kind of become.
Yes. My wife always kind of teases me because I'm a really bad dancer. But, that doesn't mean that I don't like to dance in the studio. And, with painting, it's like you're joining that conversation. You're joining, the insanity of making something that's, you hope that it's open to a larger audience, but the real possibility is that it's a diminishing audience. So you just have to be comfortable with that, work through it.